Hey YouTube, coming back at you with video number 2 of how to buy a guitar. Now, if you missed my last video, I basically was 5 things of how to buy, what to look for in buying a guitar. It was a very general overview, and today I actually want to get more in depth. This video has a lot of information, so I'm warning you now, it's a longer video. If you have the time, it's a lot of great information. If you don't, then we'll try to see what you can, bits and pieces. So what I do is I have some notes on different woods of guitars, and I also have a couple different guitars here that basically I could talk about the general construction. Now, there's 3 types of constructions in guitars. There's bolt-on, there's set neck, and then there's neck through. Now, basically with the bolt-on guitar, it literally bolts on, the neck fits in, they do carve out the neck to fit in pretty snug, and they bolt on the back. Now, some companies will use 4, some use 3, some will use 6, and some will even use 8. As far as I'm concerned, I don't really know the difference between whether you use 4, 6, or 8. Maybe it's general stability. Now, benefits of a bolt-on neck guitar. It gives you a little bit twangier of a sound, so if you really want that kind of, even if you have a humbucker, it gives you a little bit twangier of a sound, which is kind of cool. Another benefit is if this neck breaks in any way, you can literally just take it off, throw it in the fire, and then put a new one on. Fender was known for being the first person to mass produce guitars, and literally they designed these guitars so that if the neck broke, maybe your nut happened, maybe something happened with the headstock, whatever, you can literally take this neck off, throw it in your fire, and throw a new one on. The reason why I keep saying throw it in the fire is actually a lot of people back in the 50s and 60s, it seems bizarre, but back in the 50s and 60s, when they need a refret done, they literally would just take off the neck, throw it in the fire, and put a new one on. Actually, a lot of fireplaces have old fret wires in them, which is kind of bizarre to me. But hey, it's basically what Fender designed. I mean, Fender, he made guitars, he didn't play them. He didn't play guitars at all. He knew how to make them. He knew how to build them. And he knew how to mass produce them. Not saying he didn't build good guitars. I mean, he built amazing guitars. I mean, Stratocaster, Telecaster, Jazz Masters, they're absolutely phenomenal guitars. Also, so now we're going on to second design, bolt-on. Or set neck. I'm sorry, we just talked about bolt-on. So set neck, as you can see, there is a line here. But what this means is that the neck is glued into the body. So it's set in there very firm. Now, I want you to see something. And I might have to turn the guitar around the other way to see it better. Now, see how the neck is in the body? It's pretty flush. Now, I have had guitars where this will actually be in more or out more. And that will screw up with your tuning. And I've had many guitars that have been great guitars, great quality guitars, but as soon as if you put that neck too far into the body, or if you hold it too far out, I mean, then it's done deal. You're never going to be able to set that guitar up right, and then all of a sudden it's going to just feel terrible. Then the third one, which is set, it's neck through. Now, I'm going to hold the same guitar because I don't have any neck through guitars, but basically what neck through guitar is that the neck goes all the way through the body, right? Now, when you deal with a set neck, even a neck through, you're dealing with sustain. And that's what people basically look at, is you're getting less twang, you're getting more sustain, so those are getting a little more grunt. So with a set neck, you're getting a little more sustain, and with neck through, you're getting even more sustain because it's one chunk that goes through the entire body. Now, with the neck through, you got the 2 sides basically stick onto the sides. They basically just go onto the sides of the neck through. Whereas a set neck, this body is a one-piece mahogany body with a maple cap, and then the neck gets set in. Now, let's take for example, I snap this neck, knock on wood. If I snap this neck, I could get it repaired, or worst case scenario, they could initially take it off. They could, peel back the paint, they could heat it up here, they could take off the neck and put a brand new neck on if they really wanted to. With the neck through, it's not really the case unless you want to pretty much take apart the entire guitar. So I personally like set necks and bolt-on necks. I'm not the biggest fan of neck throughs, but that's just me. Not saying neck throughs are bad guitars, though. I've played some neck throughs that actually have been great guitars. Now, Now we talked about some of the general construction of the guitar. I'm actually going to get into the woods. Now, there's all different types of woods, and there's different types of sound the woods will produce. There's alder, ash, basswood, carina, mahogany, maple, poplar, and then there even is rosewood, walnut, and sometimes exotic woods like koa, babenga, purple heart, stuff like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to go through these as fast as I can because there's a lot of information here. Now, alder was used a lot with your Fender guitars in late 50s, 60s. I have a piece of paper, that's why I keep looking down. It was used a lot in the Fenders, late 50s, 60s. It was a medium weight wood. Alder is a very strong wood. It can be very clear and full-bodied sound. It's got really nice mids, nice lows, and the highs are they're nice and chimey. They're not harsh at all. Pretty good amount of sustain. And usually they use these woods under a darker finish because they don't view these woods as pretty as other ones. I say something like ash. Now, ash, there's ash in the more desirable form, which is called swamp ash. Basically, swamp ash is the lower portions of southern grown wetland trees. That's basically what it is. They're below the water. They give a certain, and basically what it does is it gives it a certain sound. It gives a lot of resonance, a lot of top end. So you get a lot more brightness in the top end. You get a lot more low end, but you get a little bit scooped in the mid range. Ash is very similar to it. There's really not too much difference as far as tone, but I know swamp ash is a little more desired. Basswood can be affordable, so that's why basswood's a lot of time used in mid-level or even budget guitars. Even sometimes high-end builders will use basswood if it's used in the right way, because basswood can actually produce a very fat sound, very balanced tone. Good mid-range. It can be soft. It can be warm. Not too harsh. Now, I'm going to talk about carina and mahogany a little bit in the same, because mahogany is kind of a denser wood, used a lot of times in Les Pauls. Mahogany can be a very, how do I want to put it, very sensitive wood. Mahogany can be bright, mahogany can be a little bit more mid-rangey, and mahogany can be a little bit darker. I've had them with all of them. I mean, generally, people think mahogany is being a little bit warmer, a little bit more mid-range to it, which is true. It can be mid-range to the brighter side, mid-range to the mid-range side, and mid-range to the lower end side. So it really depends, and that's where carina comes in. Now, carina is actually a species from Africa. It's actually known as limba, and there's white limba and dark limba. And white limba is what we know as carina. Now, it's named carina for actually harvesting purposes and when it gets moved over to the United States. But the technical name for that is white limba or black limba. I know, I believe Martin uses a type of carina or type of wood. I forgot what it's called. It begins with an S, but I believe it might be black limba because it sounds very similar to what that is. But basically, it gives you very same sounds as mahogany, but it's more consistent in the sound. So you know that piece after piece is going to be a little more mid-rangey. Now, carina also is a little bit lighter in weight. So if you want a similar tone to mahogany, but you have back issues, maybe looking into a carina style guitar. Reverend makes carinas. I know Gibson and Hamer a lot of time will make a carina, but Reverend guitars are really nice guitars. They're great in weight, and they actually sound really good. And they use carina for a lot of the guitars. Now we have maple. Maple is not always used as a body wood, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it produces a little more brighter of a sound, a little more pronounced. Usually it's used a lot of times in necks and fretboards because it can be a little too much and a little too bright, and some people can find it harsh sometimes. And then there's also poplar, which poplar is defined as a hardwood, but it actually is kind of a softer wood. Basically, poplar, the only characteristics I can find on it is that it's very bland sounding. It's not really defined in the lows, it's not defined in the mids, it's not defined in the high range. It's just usually used in very budget style guitars. Of course, I said there's rosewood. Now, rosewood's usually more in acoustics. There's also walnut. Walnut's very similar to mahogany as well. And then there's also exotic woods. And what I could find with the exotic woods is that they sometimes are more of an aesthetic thing than actual tone. So it's debatable. Then basically there's combinations of stuff. You could do like a mahogany body with a maple cap, which usually brings out a little bit of brightness. Now we're going to get into necks. I'm sorry if I seem like I'm rushing. I did this video actually once before and it went over 35 minutes, so I really don't want to give you guys that long of a video. But as far as necks, there's difference between the neck and the fretboard. I'm going to pull over the Les Paul again because this is actually the easiest way to show it. You see the binding here? That's the actual depth of the fretboard. Everything below this is the neck. Okay, so you got the neck all the way up to this binding, and then this binding is where the fretboard is. This has an ebony with a maple neck. Which is actually one of my favorite combinations of maple neck with an ebony fretboard. Maple is a very strong wood. It can also be a little bit brighter, also cuts through really nice. So, but you have mahogany, which produces a little bit warmer of a tone. So basic combinations with mahogany a lot of times are mahogany with ebony or mahogany with rosewood. Sometimes they'll do mahogany with baked maple. Now, baked maple is supposed to actually be in the spectrum closer to ebony, or it's supposed to give you a little bit more warmth, but still a certain snap that maple does. But I mean, you can get maple with rosewood fretboard. You can get maple with ebony fretboard. You could do maple with maple. Maple will definitely give you a little bit more pronounced. Now, Gibson and a lot of other companies back in, I know, around the 2012-ish era, a lot of companies went to a fretboard called Richlight. Now, some people swear by Richlight, some people hate Richlight. I've played many Richlight fretboards, whether it be Martin or Gibson, and to me they didn't feel quite right. But I mean, what basically Richlight is, it's a paper composite. It's basically recycled paper with resin, which is a type of plastic. So it's a way to produce basically a fretboard that's supposed to emulate, they say it emulates ebony. I didn't quite see that, but I mean, it's a way of companies to try to save a little bit of money and shave off their thing. But the thing is though, is that when it comes to woods, companies spend so much, and companies like Martin and Gibson, even Fender, they buy wood in such vast amount that the wood doesn't cost that much difference between the woods. And people might say different, but even my buddy who bought who's looking between an ebony fretboard, rosewood fretboard, or maple fretboard, and he was looking at the blank sheets, and even for being just a regular consumer, he was only looking at a few dollar difference between each of them, and he went, and one of them, I think the rosewood was actually a little more expensive than even the ebony was. But hey, the big companies want to make you think that certain woods cost more. That's basically what they do. Now, as far as how they can use these woods in construction with each other, like I was showing you before, this is a mahogany body with a maple cap. Now, my Les Paul Special with the 2P90s, that is a slab of mahogany, no maple cap, so there's no added extra brightness of the maple cap. This has a 3-piece maple back and also has an ebony fretboard. Now, construction wise, I think it's actually a great combination. This guitar, it still is very dark sounding. It's still got a lot of girth to it, but it still cuts through really nicely between the maple cap, the maple neck, and the ebony fretboard. I think maple's a great fretboard. I mean, you know, I think it definitely offers a certain snap that I think, you know, maple and ebony offer a certain snap that I think rosewood sometimes missing, but certain guitars, rosewood actually really helps. I've noticed a lot of semi-hollow guitars, rosewood's actually great. As far as what companies want you to think. Now, I'm going to get into cabinets a little bit because now we're going to talk about nitty-gritties of different piece bodies. Cabinets typically are not made with one piece of wood. Why? Because wood shifts and it moves and it breathes. So the same thing goes for necks and bodies. So a lot of times companies will use multiple pieces of neck, you know, multiple pieces of wood for the neck. So you might get a 3-piece maple neck or a 5-piece maple neck, or even like there's even 7-piece maple necks. You know, the Wizard neck, I think from Ibanez is a 7-piece maple neck. You know, it's a great video to actually watch. If you get the chance, type in Kiesel factory tour, and Gear Gods puts up a great one. Also, the Tone King did a great one where they actually walked around the Kiesel factory and they did they interviewed one of the Kiesels himself. I think it's the grandson of the original Kiesel. Because Kiesel, basically, which you can find out in the video, Kiesel started as a pickup company and a custom company, and then they couldn't get out of that contract because they were making pickups for like Fender, but they couldn't get out of that, so they changed their name to Carvin, and Carvin basically became what Kiesel wanted to do, a direct purchaser, so you can go to their website, purchase their guitars straight through them. And now that they're able to break the contract is able to be broken, Kiesel, basically the name Kiesel came back. So that's basically where we get Carvin, and that's where we get Kiesel from. But anyways, but when they talk about different woods and stuff like that, and they actually talk about how, you know, the more pieces of wood you have sometimes in a neck, which is true, the less they want to shift with each other and the more that they keep in line. So for example, and not that one piece is bad or good. I mean, yes, one piece can cost more in some ways, but it's not the way the companies make it seem. Like, you know, you get sometimes the standard, like Gibson, and I don't mean to pick on Gibson, but I mean, I know them very well as far as their guitars and their quality, and I do like Gibson a lot. I have 2 of them. I've had more in the past too. I have a Gibson acoustic. I've had other Gibson. Anyways, Gibson, you know, they kind of throw this, oh, our standard line sometimes is a 2-piece mahogany body, where the custom line is a 1-piece mahogany body, and all it is that they looked and they bought all the wood the same cost. They bought all the wood the same. It's just what it is that they go through the piles and piles of wood and they say, okay, this one chunk of wood is all good, so that's going to go to the custom shop, which is basically right next door. You know, it's just in a different part of the building. And they say, okay, this wood a certain section doesn't look as pretty, so we're going to cut that section off and create it into a 2-piece, and that's going to go to the standard line. Doesn't mean it's any better, it just means that the 2 pieces were 2 of the better pieces have 2 different pieces of wood and put together. And even with the true historic lines, I mean, that's a whole nother ball game. I mean, let's face it, 1959 Gibson Les Paul standard, which is the holy grail of the Les Pauls, was used Honduras mahogany. You can't get Honduras mahogany anymore. You can get other grades of mahogany, which that's what they use, but Honduras mahogany doesn't exist anymore. So when they have these true historic lines, basically what makes those cost more is labor cost. Now, I'm not going to get into this that much. I'm actually going to save why do guitars cost more in the next video, because that is a whole nother thing on its own. There's labor cost, there's whether it's made overseas versus here, what grade of wood do they use. I mean, we talked about, some companies will use a poplar body for their body, or even a basswood, because basswood still sounds great. It's just more affordable than other woods. It's not saying that basswood's actually, when I was doing a lot of research and I was researching basswood seemed like it was actually great wood. I don't know why companies don't use them or sometimes downgrade on the wood. But anyways, so back to the multiple pieces. So sometimes having multiple piece neck or multiple piece this or that is not the worst thing in the world. So, I have a 3-piece neck on my Les Paul Custom, and it's great. It holds in tune very well. Also, some things I like about my Les Paul Custom is this thing called a volute, if you could see it right there. I don't know why. LTD, ESP LTD uses them. Schecter uses them. Tons of companies that make a Les Paul style guitar uses them. Also, this guitar has the 14 or 13 degree headstock, which actually, and this might piss off a lot of people, a lot of 50s and 60s guitars use the lesser angle of a headstock. They didn't use this full 17 degree angle headstock, and I may be 100% wrong, but a lot of I have guitars from the 60s. I played guitars from the 50s and 60s from Gibson. They didn't have the aggressive headstock that they use nowadays, which they use a 17 degree headstock, and that changes tuning and stability. Look at Fender. Fender has no angle. What they do is they use a string tree, and sometimes they'll use a double string tree, but basically it's to break the strings so that holds tuning better. But how many headstocks do you hear breaking on a Fender? I don't hear many. I hear headstocks snapping all the time on a Gibson, but not as much of on a Fender, because the angle of the headstock, that makes a difference. Even how the body is constructed. This is a string through body where it actually strings through the body. That does create some sustain, and that does actually create some difference in tone, where the Gibson has a stop tail that goes over the bridge, and that creates a difference in the tone right there as well. It's all, people think it's all subjective, but little things do make a difference sometimes in the guitar. What kind of tuners you have, what kind of, if you have more of a mass on the guitars, So I hope this helps anybody out there. Shoot back if you feel like I missed anything. Leave it in a comment down below. Like, share, dislike if you didn't like it. Let me know what you think. Next week's video, I'm going to talk about why guitar companies, sometimes you pay more for a guitar, and at what point are you just paying for aesthetics versus build quality. Like, there's a certain amount, I think, if you look at a chart, there's a certain amount of build quality and a certain amount of aesthetic, and they go like this, and eventually the build quality is going to go like this, and the aesthetic's going to go like this, and it's all price. So check back next week. I'll talk to you guys in a week.